when you're ready, just put your feet on the floor and get set. Take a couple of deep breaths. My 2 youngest kids tested positive for COVID, so that's why I'm wearing this thing. So thanks for bearing with me as I do that. This morning, we're going to start sort of our awareness moment for the morning is the idea that we see more shades of green. Some of you may have heard this on the field trip. Some of you have seen, or all of us can see, well, unless you're colorblind, can see more shades of green than any other color. We probably don't think about this very much because as most of us look around, we see all kinds of colors of different intensities, different shades of red. But on the color spectrum, with the slowest wavelengths being blue and the fastest wavelengths being red, green falls right in the middle. And so the green wavelengths are where we see optimally, where we can see most different shades of green. And if we think about why this might be, our eyes have continued to evolve over time in lots of different ways. So seeing green is a really optimal sort of place for us. Think about our ancestors living in those lush forests and finding food. Being able to distinguish different shades of green is really important. So think about yourself at the grocery store. Different shade, you look at a banana that's a shade of green and you know that it's not ripe yet. And then you look at a green pepper and you might know that green peppers are less sweet than red or yellow peppers. They're all the same, just some have been ripened longer. So shades of green are really important to our history, and then as we are right now. We might not think about it, but here it is, green. So today we're going to talk about the green life, things that live a totally different way than we do. I want to point out, let's see, maybe not that one. Aha. Okay. I want to point this out. Each week in Canvas, in your modules, there are these kind of options for further exploration. You can click on these links and find more things. If I say something or one of these titles sparks your curiosity, then you can click on it and check it out. So this week there are a couple that tie into what we're doing, and I don't have time in class at this point to go into in depth in them, so I wanted to point out these 2 pieces about mushrooms, ways that mushrooms can save us from ourselves, and how a humble mushroom could save forests and fight climate change. I've recently befriended a guy who is a specialist in mushrooms. He does mushroom research here on campus and is also just really passionate. And so I have learned more about the power of mushrooms in the way that they clean the air, the way that they're easy to plant. There are some things that really are leading science to show that mushrooms might have a real future in saving where we are and changing where we're going. So I wanted to point these out to you in case you want to check those out. I'm also, another thing is that I'm behind on emails. So if you have asked me for the alternate assignment for the field trip or emailed me about something else, I apologize that I've gotten behind. I'll be replying to those this afternoon. So you'll see that from me if you're waiting for something. So let's dive into this, the green life. What are some ways that you are different from plants? In your journal there for today, Page 47, you can write some of these ideas down. When I'm talking about plants here, I'm talking about a wide variety of species. Trees and herbs and bushes and grasses and vines and ferns and mosses and green algae all live this green life. So how are you different? All right, next one. What are the ways that you are the same as or similar to plants? Similar to plants, the 5 ways that you're similar. So who would like to talk about what they wrote, either for different or the same or similar? Emma's coming with the microphone, just a second.
For the same, I said that we both need water in order to survive.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Yes. Thank you. What else?
For the same, I said we're both living on the earth.
We're both living in the earth. Yep. Thank you. Others?
For the same, I said we both reproduce.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes. Both reproduce. Mm-hmm.
For different, I put that we have opposable thumbs.
Yep. Excellent. Yes?
For the same, we can be damaged by others' actions or nature itself.
Mm-hmm. Lots of things connecting us. Yes. What else? Microphone is coming around.
For the same, I said that we're both able to die.
Both able to die. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so connections. I want to shout out this photo, funny plant photo, is from Jeff Schomar, who is the guy who runs the AV booth. So he's taken this class like 20 plus times. So when he got this photo, he sent it to me to add to this slide. So ways that we are similar and ways that we are different. I appreciate your lists. So we'll break these down a little bit. So one that wasn't mentioned today, but we have talked about, is the idea that plants breathe just like we do. So that connection of that we are breathing out our carbon dioxide, so that's coming from you, and then trees are, the chlorophyll creates, this is another one of those 4th grade science things. It creates the oxygen, and that comes to you. So they are taking in and giving off that air exchange, which we've talked about some. So through the sun's energy then, that's up there, they are creating the oxygen, which is kind of a byproduct, right? They're just sending that out. They don't need it. So the other thing they're creating is the C6H12O6, which is the sugar. That's what they're eating, right? That's what their nutrients, how they survive and grow. And so plants are eating, just like we need to eat and nourish ourselves. So they're taking the sun, using that chlorophyll, and then changing it into the energy that they need. So plants are eating. The word photosynthesis really means putting together with light. Photo being light and synthesis meaning bringing together. So that is something that we have in common. And remembering that one mature tree makes enough oxygen for 2 people and vice versa. So that's pretty interesting. The C6H12O6 is the basic chemical setup of almost all sugars. Lots of different sugars have that C6H12O6. And that's what we think about that old oak on the field trip. She must have created lots and lots of that sugar over time to be able to grow as large as she does. So then we are eating, right? And everything that we eat has been plant-based. It's all also connected to these plants, right? Whether it's the meat that we're eating, and the meat had eaten the vegetables. So everything, all of that energy comes from the sun, how plants power the planet. So everything that we do starts with the power of the sun. We have a circulatory system. Like we talked about the other day with the blood that moves through our bodies, we have that circulatory system. And plants also have a circulatory system, the system of xylem and phloem. So xylem is transporting water and nutrients from the roots up to the leaves and the shoots of the tree. And then the phloem is transporting the sugars that are made in the leaves and taking that all over the tree. So there's a system of transport inside the trees that functions very similarly to our arteries and veins. This is changed they do it by pressure. We have the heart, of course, that pumps the blood all around. They do it by a system of pressures, changing pressures inside the tree at different heights and different places, and they're able to move by the pressure through this system. So that we have in common. Plants have evolved. So the first plants that we know came about 430 million years ago. That was way long before vertebrates. So you can see the very first things that started down here and then branched off, and we start to have these protophytes that move this way. So we have first seaweed here. The first big plants, like 30 meters tall, so 90 feet or more tall, and those were woody stemmed, started about 360 million years ago, and had those roots and leaves. So they were lycopods, things that are related to ferns. They could live only in moist environments because they needed the spores, or they transported spores which need moisture to survive. And then in this era came the second innovation of plants, when we can move up here into these, where they started getting seeds. The seeds enable plants to colonize the non-wet parts of the land. And that changed the shape and the face of our planet then. So about in the Mesozoic era, that was like 250 to 65 million years ago, Pangaea, that big continent, broke into all the different pieces, And that's when the ferns were on the landscape and the gymnosperms, angiosperms, different kinds of plants. So the ginkgo trees, the pine trees, conifers, are all really, really old compared to some of the other ones. There are just the modern ones now, as we think about these, trees like this that we think about, and those are the youngest, right? So plants carry this story, a long history with them. And because they became more diverse, then mammals became more diverse, and it was all connected that way. So we share about 60% of our DNA with bananas, because we all started down here. 60% of our DNA with bananas, 50% of our DNA with other trees, 40% of our DNA is shared with apples, and 25% of our DNA is also shared with daffodils. So we're all related. For animal comparisons, we share about 44% of our DNA with bees, 90% of our DNA with cats, 84% of our DNA with dogs, and 98% of our DNA is the same as pigs. So the way that we have come to be is pretty interesting. And yet we all started in this same spot down here. So plants grow, just like we do. Things we have in common. We think about what comes to mind when I say tree is like a trunk, one trunk with this big, fluff of leaves or lots of needles if you're thinking of conifers. But not all of them follow that formula. Technically, all of the yellow that you see in here, all of those tops of trees are actually belong to one organism. This is Pando, which is in Utah Fish Lake National Forest. And they're aspen trees. They evolved 65 million years ago, just after the extinction of the dinosaurs. And so Pando means I spread in Latin. So what's happening is that they're spreading underground through their root system, and then they'll pop up another trunk and another trunk. And so it's all one, essentially one being in this large swath of forest. They say that it's about 47,000 stems, said to be the largest organism on the planet. It's probably at least about 80,000 years old, is what I've found. So just like people, we have different ways of growing, different strategies of being successful. So plants grow. And plants communicate. You may have talked about this a little bit again at the Old Oak Station. So they communicate through the air as well as underground. So the way that we talk to each other, and we can say, gosh, I hear that the flu season is going to be pretty bad. It would be good to get your flu shot. We can communicate and help to protect each other in different ways. Or don't go over there, that's dangerous over there. Stay over here. So we communicate that way, but plants also communicate. I'd like you to take in this video that Elizabeth's going to pull up for us.
Bäume sind sehr soziale Wesen und da kümmern sich tatsächlich die Eltern, die Mutterbäume um ihren Nachwuchs. Hier haben wir einen Buchenkindergarten.
I started looking at the root systems and I found that the roots of these different species, when they grew together, they were all intertwined and interlinked together.
The Lutjana people on Vancouver Island, they say Hish Ish Sawalk, which means everything is one.
Was wir als Baum betrachten, das ist nur oberirdisch. Ein Großteil des Lebens findet aber unterirdisch statt. Also auf einen Teelöffel gehen mehrere Kilometer Pilzfäden, die hier dicht verwoben das Internet des Waldes bilden.
The mycorrhizal network is just below the surface of the forest floors. All of the trees were all linked together in a single massive network. That was sort of the rudimentary understanding of the language of trees.
Bäume haben Gefühle, die können Schmerz empfinden, aber die haben auch solche Emotionen, kann man fast sagen, wie Angst. Es gibt bei Bäumen auch besondere Freundschaft, dass Bäume sich ja, wie so ein altes Ehepaar zusammentun und dann ganz besonders Rücksicht aufeinander nehmen.
We think of that as an interaction between trees, but it's really, they're looking after each other.
Also hier kämpft nicht jeder gegen jeden ums Licht, ganz im Gegenteil, hier unterstützt jeder jeden. Also ein Baum, der von Insekten befallen wird, der warnt alle anderen vor in seinem Umfeld.
Through these various experiments and our discoveries, I've started to think about the root systems of trees and forests as the brains of the forest.
Hier ist ein uralter Stumpf und dieser Stumpf, der lebt noch.
The stump is still alive because its root systems are actually grafted to its neighbors.
Von Natur aus kuscheln Bäume gerne, stehen möglichst eng zusammen und lieben die Gemeinschaft und die lieben auch die Langsamkeit.
Trees don't do well when they're by themselves. We as humans are part of that forest, and what we're perceiving is really valuable, and we should be paying attention to that.
It demonstrates those relationships that we've known and understood for a long time.
Really, they are caring for each other. They're making sure that they're a productive, healthy, vibrant, diverse community of trees, families of trees.
So connections, right? These two people, Peter Wolleben and Suzanne Simard, have done such cool work, and it's just continuing. The connections that they're finding of what's happening in forests or what happens for solo trees is really interesting. They have both written a number of books. Suzanne Simard has guest spoken on lots of different podcasts and other places. So if you're curious about this, you can look those two folks up. Check it out. Now, some of what Peter Wolleben says in this video is a little bit confusing sometimes when he's applying those emotions to plants. So I kind of dug into that a little bit more. I found another researcher. His name is Michael Pollan. He also is an author and researcher. And he says, I don't think plants are sentient. They're not conscious the way we are, but they do have agency. On their own time scale, they are reacting and they have intelligence. They deal with changes in their environment. They either adapt to it or change the environment. So how can we interpret what's really going on? And again, it's so far outside. I grew up with trees. I spent a lot of time in and around trees in the forest, but I never knew what was going on in that community until I started doing some of this research. And it's pretty new that Suzanne Simard particularly has done these research projects. Her story is quite interesting because of the work that she's been doing and finding the idea that plants depend on and create community has been disputed in a lot of very traditional science ways, or it was at the beginning. She was not very well accepted as a scientist and a researcher, but then it has become more and more evident that she's right. She has had to fight for her place in science. And yet, doesn't it kind of make sense that these trees, these giant green dots, are supporting all of these other dots? They're the ones that are connecting, they're getting the most sunlight from up above and sending it down to their roots and then supporting their neighbors. So it is said that According to a 2011 study in Philadelphia, researchers reported an average lifespan of 13 years for downtown street trees. So I was just thinking about this the other day. I was sitting someplace where the trees were all they had their little place in the sidewalk, and then the next tree wouldn't be, very close. It would be over here with its little place in the sidewalk. And I wondered how much they could connect through all of that human infrastructure. So 13 years for downtown street trees compared to 37 years for residential trees, like out in a yard someplace. 60 years for the best city sites, like city parks, and then 150 years for the rural sites. So they are it's talking about needing that connection to sustain a healthy life for a longer amount of time. So why don't you talk to your neighbors about this? Think about your favorite tree in your history. Think about where it was, how it may have been connected, and then tell that story to your neighbor. Can I get a tree story? I would love to hear a tree story.
I have a mango tree in my yard. It's pretty sick. So yeah,
How big is it?
it's pretty big. It makes a lot of mangoes. So
Nice.
I think that means
Yeah,
it's pretty big.
I'm a little bit jealous.
I went to Hawaii one time, and they have these like rainbow trees, and
Oh.
like their bark is kind of rainbow.
That's
It's
pretty
cool.
sweet. Yeah, would be cool. I wonder how that serves the tree. I wonder if that helps it in any way getting or making food. That's intriguing. That's very cool. Any others? Yes, one more.
I would say that life is like really fragile, especially with trees. I was telling my group about how like I sort of killed a tree and how it still stayed up and no one knew it was dead until a couple days later. But yeah.
Yeah. How did you kill it?
Well, it was a really bad weekend, and I sort of ran into it with a sparkler. And
got it.
you know, it sort of just 2 days later we saw it starting to decay.
Yeah.
And it was still standing up.
Right. Well, they're
But-
tough, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
It gave me a big bump,
Yeah.
like on my forehead,
Oh.
and a concussion. But it's okay. I survived.
I'm glad you are okay. I'm sorry the tree is not. All right, one more story.
So one of my trees at home is very similar to the very large oak that we saw there. It's about the same size, and it's just really cool. And it's been there for like at least 40 years.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. So connections to trees. So a few more things that we have in common with trees. These parts of the tree, so the red bud over the Nittany lion there, the cone of the hemlock, the blossoms of the apples, the the blossoms of the dogwoods, these are all spring happenings, right? These are maple leaves with their little maple fronds there. So what do you see in these images? Like, what does this make you think of when you look at these images? Anything that comes up? Well, these parts, the trees have these parts because plants have sex. Somebody brought this up earlier. They multiply, right? They have seeds. All of these are the sex parts of the tree. This is what's happening, how trees make baby trees. So what happens when in the spring, you know, your car gets covered with pollen or you're walking through clouds of pollen? That's like tree sex all over the place is what's happening, because the pollen has to be transferred from flower to flower, from tree to tree, and that's what's going on. So we have one more video here, the parts of the flower, and this video is going to explain a little bit about what's happening. I know that this video is really old and a little bit cheesy, but it's the best one I can find. So please just bear with it.
Flower is pollinated and the pollen lands here, but it still isn't fertilization. The nucleus in the pollen still has to reach the nucleus in the egg, down here. Now the pollen grows a long tube, like a long straw, which funnels the nucleus to the egg.
Seen under a microscope, these pollen grains are germinating. Pollen tubes are growing from the pollen grains. The male nucleus from the pollen passes down the tube on its way to the female egg cell, where they will fuse and fertilization will be complete.
So it's a pretty cool thing, right?
Cigarette butts make up.
So when we look at flowers and think, I mean, I love flowers. I love having flowers in my yard. I love having flowers in my kitchen. Anytime I can have flowers nearby, it makes me happy. But what I don't think about is this whole process of where the pollen gets trapped up here, and then it has to go all the way down here to connect to the egg, which then leads to these different kinds of seeds, right? Plants have babies. These are plant babies. So they get then planted in a lot of different kinds of ways. So those seeds, they're dispersing their babies away from home, which your parents have now dispersed you. You're away from home. And the ways that plants do that, we all are familiar with these. They're called samaros. They're the maple tree seeds. They come down like little helicopters. So the reason that they have the little helicopter part is so that they're not just dropping straight down. If they were to land on the ground right under their mama tree, then they wouldn't, it might be too shady. So they want to go a little ways away, so they have these little things that carry them on the wind, and they spread out from their mom. Apples, one of our favorite things. We just ate a whole bunch of these on the field trip. I'm sure that some of you threw your apple core into the weeds, and that's how they get dispersed. You've just planted apple seeds, right? But other things eat them too. Rabbits, deer, squirrels, all those kind of animals are consuming those seeds, and then they're pooping them out, right? So not only is that seed around, actually, if we think about the apple itself, that portion of the apple that we like to eat is all about fertilizing the seeds that are inside. So if you think about how that apple, if we didn't eat it, it falls on the ground, and then that outside part starts to decay. That's the food for the growing seeds that are inside. So when they get eaten by something else and then pooped out in deer poop someplace farther away, then that provides that fertilizer for those seeds to grow. There are also acorns. This is a blue jay. They are squirrels seem like they do a lot with acorns, but it has actually been shown that blue jays are the #1 planter of oak trees because they also cache the oak seeds, which are the acorns, and they are also moving them away from their parents. And then there's water. Water is a transport. These alder seeds, alder tree seeds, can be carried. They grow on the sides of streams and falling in the water, and then it gets carried down to another place along the bank and planted. Alder tree seeds can stay in the water up to a year without damaging the actual seed growing part inside. So there's a lot of different ways for seeds to be dispersed, just like I'm sure that your dispersal from home has been different for each one of you. And somebody mentioned this, trees die. They call these nurse logs. When there's a tree that has fallen and a log laying on the forest floor, nurse logs, it's very interesting that they're called that. I mean, they're nurturing, right? They're taking care of life, just like the nurses when you go to the doctor. They're taking care of your life. So these nurse logs are then giving their energy to the trees and plants, the mosses, the ferns that are growing on top of them. It's also been shown, you may have noticed that the old oak at Shavers Creek is starting to fail. Fail is kind of a relative word. She's starting to die. And so she is now in the process of sending her nutrients down and out into the forest because she knows that's happening, or she senses that it's coming to the end. So she can send out as much nutrients as she can. And then when she dies and falls over, even more nutrients will be released into the cycle. So lots of different ways that we are similar and some different, but more similar to trees. Breathe, made up of the same elements. We eat, have a circulatory system. We've evolved, we grow, we share resources, we communicate, we have sex and babies. We disperse our young, and they do too, and they die and return to Earth. Cool. Trees, plants. So we're still in the process of this comprehending what unlearning means, right? So go back in your mind for a moment to high school and think about something that you did then that you don't do anymore now. And think about how that has changed for you. Could be an idea or a belief or a story or an activity. Things that don't serve you anymore, you let them go, right? So the value of unlearning things is recognizing that it's sort of a stifling mindset, that something is stuck, the how we've always done it kind of syndrome. So for me, this whole idea of trees, now when the kids are in the backyard, and they're kids, and so like hitting the tree, I have a big cedar tree in my backyard, they hit that tree with a bat, and suddenly I wonder what's happening inside that tree, what that tree is experiencing, and so it's hard not to be, overprotective. Stop hitting the trees. So how can we learn and unlearn and relearn these things that we are working with in class, birth and death and connections? So here's another one. Somebody mentioned that we have opposable thumbs, as did our ancestors. Why do we have opposable thumbs? Whoever answered that over here, do you know why we have opposable thumbs? How they came to be? Yes. You have no idea. It's because of trees. If you think about that perfect grip, it's because our ancestors climbed trees for safety, climbed trees for food, for shelter. The grasping hands of primates are an adaptation to life in the trees. The common ancestors of all primates evolved an opposable thumb that helped them grasp branches. As the grasping hand evolved, claws disappeared. Today, most primates instead have flat fingernails and large fingertip pads, which help them to hold on. We have a long and complex relationship extending far, far back in our evolutionary history. Us and trees. Plants provide for us nutrition and fiber and pharmaceuticals and energy for plants and all sorts of other animals around the globe. So plant domestication and agriculture has changed, of course, over our time and helped us as humans, our settlements to become more and more complex. And so because of plants and because of our way of working with plants, that's the way that we've developed into the way that we survive in our communities now. That we can have cities where food doesn't grow, but we can transport food in. So we rely on this distribution of food, of plant food from all over the world. In addition, plants are not just things that we use as food, but also key components of cultures and religions and art, medicines. So this can be seen in this beautiful fern tendril, just how much art is in there, the connection of art and science. Plants are central to our societies in so many different ways. So there was, a while back, the Chipko movement started in the 1970s. It was a nonviolent movement aimed at the protection of conservation of trees and forests. The name of the Chipko movement originated from the word embrace, as the villagers used to hug the trees to protect them from woodcutters. The Chipko movement was based on a philosophy of peaceful resistance to achieve goals. Trees are our bodies. If you wish to cut down the trees, your chainsaws will have to go through our bodies. We will live or die with our trees. It's just one culture that was connected to and revered the trees, understood and appreciated their value of all these different ways that they shape our culture. And lots of different religions and cultures have the origin tree story. The tree of life, if you remember back to the Native American story that I shared with you earlier in the semester, the origin story, as she fell out of the sky, she grabbed branches from the tree of life as she fell through that hole. What we're doing to the forests of the world is but a mere reflection of what we are doing to ourselves and to one another. You might want to write that down. Mahatma Gandhi. Deforestation has ramped up to an extraordinary rate. People wanting to use that land for agriculture or for grazing cattle. I think that we've lost some leg of our connection, some part of our connection to the forests, to the world. My dad was in this class one time. He comes occasionally. And afterward, he sent me his list of notes of things that I could do differently, as a very traditional dad thing to do. But then he ended that message, his email message, by saying, "We must take care of our trees just like we take care of our own bodies. If we don't, they won't be around to help us in the many ways that they do." So how can we increase that connection? What comes up for you when you see these pictures? Talk to your neighbor for a moment. So what's coming up for you? Who has a comment, question, a thought, a feeling? I'd like to hear from 3 people. What's coming up for you? There's somebody in the back has? Okay, she's coming. Somebody else over on this side, maybe, as they're getting the microphone there.
I say love, compassion, one with nature, a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's lovely. Yeah.
There's a voluntary aspect to it. It's not like when we were on the field trip and we all had to kind of get in line. For some, that seemed a little awkward, myself included. I wasn't expecting it. And the reason it is awkward is because we don't really think of trees in kind of a affectionate setting, you know? Whereas these guys, they seem to have an understanding about the placement of trees in our life and the importance. And they're kind of expressing it in more of a physical way than just, through words.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. So that awkwardness, like you said, not the only one. So after all we've been through, us and trees, why is it awkward? It does feel a bit odd. So I encourage you to think about your relationships with plants. I'll end with this quote. No 2 trees are the same to raven. No 2 branches are the same to wren. If what a tree does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. Thank you. Have a good day.